Hello, it's another great time to connect with you from whatever part of the world you're joining. Remember, we've been doing a series on the research process, trying to look into the main aspects that make up the research process, scientific research process, whether academic or in the practical work of organizations and government. So after looking into introducing the research process, talking a little bit about the methodology, what makes up a methodology, and such, we have some feedback that's calling us to talk about ethical considerations in detail. Remember, ethical considerations is part of what makes your research reliable and valid. So I thought to make a brief video on the same, and then we can proceed with other main components that we're looking at. So as I've mentioned, ethical considerations make up your research valid, reliable, and generally it will be accepted in the scientific community. Whether it's your schoolwork as a thesis, dissertation, or it is an organizational project that seriously has to consider the ethics of research. So ethics, as well as the legal provisions of a specific entity like state or country, or county in our Kenyan context. So we have to observe that. Now, earlier I had talked about seeking approval. We have the NACOSTI in Kenya, which is the commission in charge of technology, innovation, and approving the research process. So you need their approval first. So you apply with them to get the ethical, or rather the permit to do your research. We also have ethical committees. I have seen different organizations have ethical committees. So for instance, an example could be AMREF Africa. They have their own ethical committee. I believe the United Nations also has their own ethical committee, World Health Organization, and others. So when you are doing a research with these respective organizations, then you're required to share your protocol or proposals to them for ethical approval. You just don't write and proceed. No, you have to be approved first. Now, we have a wide range of ethical considerations that are at the core of the research process, whether it's academic, whether it's organizational, government, even the private sector. Remember, the private sector, you could conduct a market research. That market research may involve collecting information and data from the people, or going to the field to talk to people. At that point, you need an ethical approval. We shall see why. So one of the main ethical considerations that is prioritized is the informed consent. So with informed consent, you want to have your respondents agreeing to participate in your research. You don't force them. And this agreement comes in after you've laid out what the research is all about. You need to give full disclosure and tell them these are the potential risks, these are the procedures we shall be using. For instance, we shall administer questionnaires. We shall also have some groups sitting together for focus group discussions. We shall interview, let's say, people with expert knowledge about a specific subject. So they need to be told all that before they can consent. You just don't go in and say we're doing a research on, let's say, typhoid prevalence or any other topic, and then they accept before they can understand what the research entails. They must be fully informed about what that research is before they can consent to participate in it. That should be very clear from the start. Now we have an aspect of still under informed consent, although it can stand on its own, the freedom to withdraw from the research at any time they would like or they would wish to withdraw. I have been doing researches, and every time I am training the research assistants, I always remind them, if you have provided full disclosure of the research to the respondents and they've agreed to participate, but along the way, let's say you have 20 questions, and then along the way, when they are just providing new responses on question 29, or rather question 19, that respondent realizes I should not be participating in this research. They are getting information that I am not either I don't agree to, or I just don't want to participate in it, even if it's the question 29. Once the respondent says they will not want their responses to be recorded, then you stop, and that either questionnaire, or if it was an interview, it has to be discarded. It has to be deleted from other responses that come through. And sometimes what you do in such cases is you have just an extra form to indicate that the respondent, let's say, dropped from the research, and probably they can sign. But here is where we say the respondent is always right, in terms of if they decide they're signing some forms, if they decide they don't want to sign some forms, it's their decision. You don't force them. So that aspect of freedom to withdraw at any time without any penalty, without any consequence, should be very much communicated to them before they can start the process. You actually inform them before the research starts that you can withdraw from this process at any time you wish, although it's not the wish of the lead researcher or the statistician for respondents to withdraw from the process, because you see, it's your sample size is going down. So you have a duty to make sure you're communicating everything clearly. By the time you're filling those responses, no one is dropping. In addition to that, the aspect of informed consent, remember you need to deal with people who are mentally capable. Don't go for incapacitated individuals, like mentally ill, people who are depressed. You're administering questionnaires to them. That is just, it's wrong, both ethically and legally. Just the way we say, if a leader is incapacitated, they are supposed to leave their position. In this case, if a certain section of the population is incapacitated in terms of mentally, or let's say they are children, they are prisoners, impaired individuals, you don't take them through the tough process of questions and thinking and that tough process of responding to your questions. The issue of children is very sensitive. Sometimes you'll be doing research, and let's say I have seen a lot of research on an example has been teenage pregnancies. So where you find yourself, you have to interview young mothers. By young mothers, I mean those who've given birth before the age of, let's say, the age of adulthood. In our context is 18 years. So if you find yourself in such kind of a situation, you have different options you can use. First of all, you need to seek consent. You can seek consent from their parents, the parents of these young mothers. or their partners. Let's say their partner could be above 18 years. So you can talk to their partners, and those are let's say the father of the child. Probably he could be above 18. So you seek consent from him and say, I want to interview the mother of your child, and I seek your approval. In case both father and mother are minors below the age of 18 years, then you may need the approval of their parents who are adults. Don't proceed and say these are adults who have given birth yet they are minors. It could have some serious implications in subsequent steps. And in our context, Kenya, we now have the Data Commission. I hope soon I'll be inviting a friend to come and talk about what the Data Protection Commission does and what does it mean to manage all these issues that I'm trying to mention here. It's very important to consider that. In fact, I'll be mentioning something else that is related to what the data protection does. I've already highlighted like how you need to protect the data and these respondents, but we shall highlight more. Now we have another key aspect of minimizing harm to your respondents. Very critical ethical consideration. This is particularly important in those let's say medical tests and clinical trial sort of researches, where you might need to do some tests on your respondents. In that case, you're saying the benefits must outweigh the potential risks. The benefits of doing that research, the tests. Let's take an example of you're introducing a vaccine. The benefits of introducing that vaccine should outweigh any potential harm that can be suffered as a result of trying to test if the vaccine works or not. That needs to be clear from the onset. If by any chance the tests will result in death, you want to avoid that process until it's clear that we shall not lose lives just because we are testing a vaccine. And remember, in such sensitive cases, also the respondents need to sign consent that I am participating in this process and I understand the potential risks. Those risks need to be communicated to them. Remember, the full consent need to be communicated to them before they can undergo the testing. You don't want to fall into legal issues of you tested on respondents before informing them they never signed, they were minors and they participated in this. You might find yourself spending very many years behind bars, and that's not something you want to do. So you see, we are saying the potential benefits should outweigh the risks or the potential risks. Now, we understand, like in that specific context, you understand there are potential risks. You as the researcher or the researching organization, you're required to provide protocol and measures to address or mitigate those potential risks. So let's say in our case, if the vaccine or the test on the vaccine test is likely to result in death, how can we mitigate it? How can we address that potential risk? Probably we can continue working on the vaccine to a level that it might result in some side effects, let's say nausea, diarrhea, but it is not resulting in death. So we've reduced the potential impact, the negative impact of that testing, vaccine testing on our respondents or on our sample. And of course, part of the testing for vaccine is taking a sample. You don't test on a whole population. We've had this conversation before. Was, for instance, COVID-19 a test on the whole population or not? So Those are now the sensitive issues that come with research, and if you have to navigate them, you should have clarity on what you're doing. So addressing those consequences can be good, and you make sure your respondents or your target population is as much as possible protected from harm. And even before you think about mitigating the harm, first of all, the first step is to keep in mind and consider that your research process will not be exposing your respondents, your target population, to unnecessary physical or psychological harm. Some harm could be unnecessary. For instance, you take, the way I had mentioned earlier, you take your participants to a focus group discussion, and then within that setting you're trying to introduce very sensitive family issues, and let's say there is one person who has gone through some very bad divorce, and you're just reminding them of everything that happened before. That is unnecessary mental torture or mental risks. Sometimes physical, they have said testing could be both or either of them. You should avoid that unnecessary suffering. Sometimes when you're going into the field or villages to find out about a specific topic, it's always very interesting because the respondents, you establish very good rapport with them, and they can share with you everything, sometimes even their family matters. You're not there as a psychologist, of course. You can only help enough. You're not there to offer financial support as the researcher, so you can only, let's say, offer guidance on steps 1 to 3 can be taken, and you try to seek help from the relevant individuals or authorities. Now, I'm mentioning this because you go to the field and you get sensitive information about the respondents tell you sensitive information. They tell you private information. Private and sensitive, or both. Confidential information. Is not your role to pass the information to the authorities. Although we can have some exceptions. We can have some exceptions where someone is engaged in an illegal activity that is resulting in harm to other members of the community. For instance, you meet someone and they are engaged in child trafficking and they open up to you. You might need to find a wise way to have that addressed. And those are dynamics of carrying out research. So child trafficking, of course, it's unethical, it's illegal. If someone opens up to doing this and it's happening, you might need to have a conversation on how that can be addressed within that specific setting. I don't have advice on how to handle that, but those are dynamics that might emerge. Sometimes very sensitive issues emerge while you are in the field. So keep that in mind. That was the confidentiality, sensitive and private. Another aspect could be you're interviewing, let's say, the head of the household, and the head of the household opens up to you about the income they earn on a monthly basis. So probably you're the first person to know that kind of information. Even the wife, or let's say in this case, if the head of the household is the wife, they say the man doesn't know. So it's not your duty to pass the information to the other members of the household. It's not within your sphere of work. Leave that. Get the information, put together, tabulate, without keeping the name of the respondent, and it should now take me to the next aspect of ethical consideration: anonymization of data. You get critical personal information, confidential information, you're not supposed to keep the names, identity, any information that will end up identifying that respective respondent. It has to be protected. So we do what we call anonymization. For instance, if you're given an ID number, remember ID number can be traced, or the name, or some initials or some nicknames, they can be traced, or the household number, probably based on, let's say, the census done by the relevant institution. So in that case, what we're saying is anonymization of that data. You can decide to allocate numbers 1, 2, 3 to whichever number, so that if I come and look at number 12, it doesn't help me to know which respondent was that. Anonymization of that data. That is also a very critical aspect under the Data Protection Act. Hopefully we shall be able to get someone to talk in detail about that. In addition to that, remember, it's the entire research process. We are on ethical considerations, the legality part of it, secure storage. We have secure and limited access, and these need to be clearly indicated in the research protocol or proposal. For instance, let me clarify that a little bit. You go to the field, or that research, the organization that is doing that research, let's say sometimes I'm finding myself managing that research with 2-3 other individuals. Let's say we could have the principal investigator, we could have the co-investigator, we could have the statistician or the data analyst, we could have the research assistant. So who is supposed to access that data? That's what we mean by limited access. Where is the limit? That needs to be clarified. And from my experience is the research assistant will have access, of course, because they'll be collecting the data. Once it's stored somewhere, the access need to be reduced, limited further. Let's say we only have the principal investigator, the co-investigator, and the statistician. The data analyst, of course, needs access to that data because they need to analyze, they need to play around with, they need to do some data cleaning. So very important for them. So it needs to be very much limited. You don't take that data and share with your local authority. You don't secure storage. This one, it starts from the research assistants all the way to anyone else who have access to that data. You don't want to be in a situation where you, let's say, leave your computer or your phone or the questionnaires that have been filled in an open space that anyone can have access, and probably take photographs. You don't want to create that situation. You don't want to leave traces of your data behind that other unauthorized people will have access. So in that case, what we're saying is you need to make sure the accessibility is very much secure. You could have password protected folders. You could have your drive as an organization, as a government parastatal, a government office. You have password protected drive, both physical drive or cloud services. Cloud services nowadays are proving to be very good, and we can talk about cloud services at some time because we are in this business of data management and analysis. So cloud services have been quite good with me, that it's easy to store the data in cloud and encrypt with some code, and that's secure enough. If anyone needs access, they must request for access. And if it's beyond the scope of the people who are engaged in the research, then what we're saying is we shall not be giving that accessibility. So secure access, or rather secure storage and limited access of the data. It's still within the sphere of protecting private information, confidential information, and anything that is related to the research. We have another very important aspect: scientific integrity. Scientific integrity, most people overlook it, but it plays a big role in developing a reliable study research, a valid, can be cited many years from the time you do it, after you've done it. And this not only happens in data collection or data management or data analysis, it happens in the entire process. Let me clarify that. Scientific integrity, we're saying you're not supposed to fabricate, avoid fabrication of information, avoid falsifying of data. For instance, you as a data analyst, you know how to play around with p-values and regression models. You know how to play around with those dependent and independent variables. You know how to play around with those test statistics. And then probably it's only you within the whole team who understands what a p-value is and what hypothesis testing is, and what is the threshold of the confidence to say this is the conclusion I'm making. And then you take advantage, you falsify numbers just because you want to prove something in terms of the research found this, yet it's false. So here people ask, what happens if those who understand the technical terms of statistics, what happens if I need to reject the null hypothesis, or the p-value is above 0.05? That is what you found out. Keep it that way. Don't change. Don't falsify just because you want to please someone or you want to show a different picture. Once you start changing numbers during analysis, you've nullified the entire research. It doesn't make sense anymore. That's not the business you want to engage in as a data analyst. And probably we can have more conversation around working with those statistical terms and terminology and everything else related to that. You provide the picture the way it is, how the data has come in, what you've analyzed, processed, and found out. That is what you report exactly. It doesn't matter whether it's pleasing someone, whether it's not pleasing someone, you're reporting the way it is. That's why we say data analysts should be truthful people. In our Kenyan context, we say truthful men. So you need to be truthful at all levels, or else you'll mess up the entire research. And I have said the way the data is coming in, processed, released, output, transparency in reporting what you found out. If the p-value is above or below 0.5, it's that way. Ours is like a doctor. You have malaria. That's what I report to you. It's not like you have malaria, yet I tell you you don't have. You've created a very big problem. We are also required to acknowledge limitations of our study. For instance, we went to the field and we were expecting to interview 250 respondents, yet only 200 turned up. That has created, let's say, a sample problem, because the sample is now lower than we expected. So probably we can say that is around 75% of our respondents stand up, and this is of course above the threshold of 60 or 70%, but we could have more accurate results if we had more than 250 respondents. So you're acknowledging that your research may not be entirely 100% accurate. We have some bias that has come in, or some gaps have come in because the respondents were small, or the number was small. Now, sometimes you go to the field and you get not so good reception. The reception from the respondent is not good. I've experienced that once in some informal settlements while I was collecting data on young people, and we walked in, we had already planned with the leadership of those groups in the informal settlements, and when we just want to start the research process, someone else comes and says, these guys should give us money before we can give them any information. So it was quite a difficult situation to manage, but I'm happy that we managed well and came out safely, because sometimes it can get really rough. Now in that case, first of all, paying people before they can give you data or they can accept to be interviewed, it's unethical. It's not the right thing. It's not appropriate. You don't pay people to give you information. Of course, we have those scenarios where big organizations or companies have some data that they have collected over time and they sell that data. That's a different scenario. In my case, I'm saying I go pay a respondent for them to tell me about their experience, about their perception about a specific topic. That's not allowed. It's not allowed at all. It's like you're paying. It's like you're bribing for that research to be complete. So I was to forget that, but it's good that it's come up, and it has come up when I was talking about limitations. So for instance, in what I was mentioning, our research could not successfully end, or our data collection could not successfully end, because we had some negative reception from the community. And these kind of dynamics we need also some time to talk about. Sometimes the dynamics you find in the field really can affect the entire research process. Nevertheless, what I was saying is you need to openly communicate the limitations that you encountered. You're not supposed to hide and and show that your research was perfect, yet you had some issues that might end up introducing some biases. Adhering to professional research standards, very important. I had tried to mention that you don't go to the field to educate, you're going there to collect data. In fact, when I'm going into these places, I encourage my research assistants, even myself, not to wear like you're going for some corporate event. Wear like you're someone who belongs to that community. Be part of them. Research standards require you to collect data with integrity, adhering to all the ethical considerations we're highlighting. So observe those professional standards, research standards. You're not recruiting minors. You're not forcing people to participate in the research. We have another key aspect, that is equitability or equitable selection of subjects or respondents. I had highlighted a little bit on this about sampling. Sampling should give all the respondents an equal chance of selection, even though the non-probabilistic sampling techniques like snowball sampling, convenience sampling, and others might have some aspects of not all respondents have an equal chance of selection. Nevertheless, at least there is a threshold to say we are using snowball or using a purposive sampling because we're only going for the experts in this field. So that is a justification on why it's being used. But what we're saying is, when you go to the field, you're not going to select respondents just because you feel like you want to select them. You have some bias, let's say, towards men or towards women, and therefore you avoid them. You remove them from your research, or you go in some cosmopolitan setting and then you avoid interviewing specific ethnicity. That is wrong. It is even illegal. It's discriminating. So you're not going into that business. You're only supposed to engage in that equitable selection of the respondents or the subjects. You must make sure your research tool, is enabling everybody to participate, even though you may not select all of them, but at least those who select should be representative of the target population. So that needs to be observed. Another critical factor avoid, we call it exploitation of the marginalized communities. You go in the field, and because some people just are poor, or they are not so much exposed, not so much informed, and then you want to take advantage of that, and probably you start collecting even data that is beyond what the research is calling for. Probably you've been given some reimbursement that they need to get for, let's say, transport to come and give you data. That is not payment, remember? It's just reimbursing for the transport. And then you don't do that. You keep the money to yourself. It's like you are exploiting those groups, both the marginalized and the disadvantaged. Remember, in our communities, we have different disadvantaged groups. Probably you're interviewing the disabled, or you're doing some tests on a specific group, and because they are not knowledgeable on legality of the research or the ethical aspects of research, you end up exploiting them, sometimes discriminating them, sometimes just doing wrong things. That is not the business of scientific research. That is your personal business. And by any chance you are the data analyst, the statistician, the BI, or BI I mean the principal investigator, and then you realize one of your team members is engaged in such kind of activities, it is your duty to stop it right there when you observe it. So quite important. And then to finish up, last but not least, is independent review of the entire research process, the protocol you develop. For instance, you will develop a proposal. I want to do a research. It's good that your research is reviewed by approved ethical committees, sometimes international review boards. I had mentioned, for instance, some organizations have their independent ethical review ethics committees. They need to review the protocol, they need to review the research tools, they need to review the data that you've collected, they need to review the entire report that you come up with, let's say before you publish or before you disseminate to anybody. They need to review it to make sure that it's adhering to the required standards. So that just means you have external oversight of everything you've done. I can be an expert in research, but I don't say I am perfect. We could have these gaps, and they end up affecting the research. So this is where the external oversight comes in. And that external oversight, remember, is also coming from experts themselves. So that has to be observed. And allow your work to be open to other experts to review. If it's in the academic world, remember, you have your professors are reviewing your work. They are providing expert knowledge. They are providing expert review. That is a whole process of external review of your work. Even when you want to publish your work, remember, you have your professors who took you through the process. But when you'll be publishing with an independent publisher, they have their experts to review your work. So if you had paid a professor somewhere to just allow your work to go through, if you had bribed some board to just approve your work, remember, there is an external expert or board that needs to review your work, or at least they will review your work. So very important in the research process. And then finally, it is good to constantly review the conduct that is being undertaken in the research process. For instance, if I come in as the lead researcher, or the statistician, or the principal investigator, I have the mandate to make sure every day I am supervising, let's say, the research assistants. You might have trained them, but it's good to constantly follow up and find out, are they following the standards which we had established? What are the new dynamics that are emerging? You could train, yeah, but new dynamics are emerging in the field and then you don't have knowledge of. So you are now encountering that and trying to come up with solutions collaboratively within that context. Some dynamics emerge that you don't anticipate. So it's good to constantly supervise the research process. The research process during data collection, during protocol development, during research tool development, data analysis, reporting, it's not supposed to be left to one person. There need to be an ongoing monitoring of the research conduct. It needs to be observed to the latter. All these ethical considerations that I have highlighted need to be observed to the latter. No overlooking one because it's just not there. Everything needs to be observed. I hope this helped you a lot. I was a little bit detailed. I thought I could spend 10 to 20 minutes, but it's gone beyond that, more than double the time I had anticipated. But I wanted to be as more detailed as possible. Of course, we shall continue to engage in these conversations, but to keep you informed, to keep you updated on the right thing to do in the research process. Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Someone told me you're doing content creation. Yes, it's really going on well. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye.